Yeah, the actual link as well. Yeah, I moved to. There you go.
Welcome. I know it is switching from AM to PM in Central Time, so I'll say good morning and good afternoon. Thank you very much for coming. My name is Lori Haight, and I serve as the Director of Student Services at the School of Information and Library Science at UNC Chapel Hill. And so we have a few more people. We're going to give another 30 seconds or so for people to get settled. And then we'll jump into our conversation today on careers in public librarianship. It's exciting to see people still coming in, but we're going to go ahead and get started. Here for your viewing pleasure are the rest of our panels before our GLAM Jam happens at the end of the month. So we do have academic librarianship this Friday, and next week we have both law librarianship and careers and archives. So hopefully if you are interested in those, you will also attend. For some housekeeping before we get started, we ask that you stay muted during our presentation, and we would love to have your camera if that makes you comfortable, so that we can see who's out there in the audience. And we do have some questions that we're going to get started with, but if you do have any additional questions, please use the chat, and that's where we'll go as we finish up the questions that we have prepared. So I'm going to stop sharing now and get started. So first of all, I'd like to go around and introduce our three panelists and let them say their name, what library they're at, and maybe a little bit about their path to librarianship. And so we'll start with Jean.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jean Canosa-Albano. Getting over a cold, so sorry for the nasal tone in my voice here. Great to be with you. Fun to see a couple of familiar faces and names, and to meet so many new folks. I'm here at Springfield City Library, where I'm the Assistant Director for Public Services, and we are located in Western Massachusetts. So the first Springfield in colonized America. And so it's, let's see, you hear me talking about hello and seeing all these people. That's sort of how I got into librarianship, I think, is I've been evaluated as a woo person, someone who likes to make connections with people, someone who likes to network. And I stumbled into the job when I spent my last semester of college in Spain as a Spanish major. Came back and it was a lousy job market, and happened to see a job posting for what we might call paraprofessional library work, and said, "Oh, Mom, here's a job I could get that you would have liked," because she'd always said she would have liked to have been a librarian. And so that's many, many years later. Here I am, and excited to talk with you all today. So, and to learn from my fellow panelists. Thank you.
Thank you. Shauna, can you go next?
Sure. Hey, everyone. My name is Shauna Anderson. I'm the director at Plymouth District Library, which is in Michigan. We're located like halfway between Detroit and Ann Arbor. We serve about 35,000 residents. It's a smaller kind of library setup. I got into libraries after serving in the Peace Corps, actually. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in the Philippines, did a bunch of work around like literacy and education outside of schools. So like technology classes and ESL kind of work and livelihood development projects and all of that. I wanted to come back to the States and sort of stay in that similar vein. I thought about social work for a little bit. I thought about education and going into schools. And I really had this light bulb moment that I think a lot of us have with librarianship, where you don't think about it until it's presented to you as an option. And you're like, oh my goodness, that's what libraries do. And so I went to University of Michigan and got my degree in libraries and community informatics. I was a teen librarian for a number of years at Skokie Public Library, ended up running the department there for young adult services, and then moved to Michigan in the past 5 or so years, and just recently became the director about a year and a half ago here at Plymouth. Yeah, that's my spiel.
Thank you very much. And Tarza, can you go?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Tarza Tawfik. I am the Employee Relations Coordinator at St. Louis County Library. We're located in St. Louis, Missouri. We serve about an 800 or so square mile territory located within this area, and a little bit under 1 million patrons throughout our territory. I started in libraries almost 8 years ago here at this library system, and my first role was a lab trainer. So I would teach the public technology computer classes to a lot of times our older patrons, and I loved it. I never thought about working in a library before until I started working here. My background was in education, so I wanted to give back to or be a part of the systems that kind of raised me in America after my family and I moved here. And then I learned about libraries that I did not really get a teaching job. So I was teacher assistant, subbing, working in restaurants at the same time. And when I finally landed at the library, I was like, these are all the ways that we support individuals and people. And strangely, you don't have to go by some of the political rules or shortcomings that a school district or territory might have. So I got really interested in this industry, and over the time I've become a staff trainer, so helping our staff here be library professionals. And now in this role, we work more on recruiting and in general supporting the librarians and workers of our organization, because it can be a daunting industry to go in, a little bit selfless. So I try to provide the help to our library workers, because they're the ones that are really giving up parts of themselves to support their communities.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And that goes right into our next question about if I'm going to open up the floor that any and all of you can answer each of the questions. But our next question is, can you talk a little bit about the public service aspect of a position in a public library versus the more academic or theoretical approach that you might have in a graduate program?
I'd be happy to kick that one off. I think when you're in school, you can focus on a lot of the ideas about being in a public library environment. I think it's easy to focus on like stuff, you know, like collections and things like that. But that's a very small piece of what a public librarian kind of does day to day. It is really a job that's about people. You are in a forward-facing situation, so you're always in front of the public, whether you are facilitating reference interviews or you are facilitating classes. Facilitation, I think, is one of the bigger skills that you are going to flex on a regular basis when it comes to public library work, more so than in a lot of different library kind of adjacent fields. So that's one thing that I think is important to stress, that you don't always get opportunities to facilitate. Maybe in your classes, you can facilitate, you know, conversations, or you facilitate presentations or things like that. But it really is a lot of people skills that go into this work.
I would agree with what Shauna's saying. One beautiful thing about library school is the chance to talk with your peers, the cohort that you're studying with, and do lots of reading, learn from your professors about the theoretical. And I feel that that will help you develop or expand your sense of what your values are for how you're going to be doing the work, how you're, so that when the rubber hits the road, you'll have that foundation that lets you decide which way to go, I guess, with that rubber on the road. So that's a real benefit of studying at library school for your grad degree. But knowing that you're going to be working with people coming from every direction is super important. Nothing is all theoretical and foundations, and nothing's all just public services. I think they have to come together.
I agree with both Shauna and Jean on that. I think people don't realize what the public service part of working in a library is like. And I think Shauna really touched on that about being a people person. So you have to you have to be empathetic, and you have to want to be involved in your community and have some care for how people are treated, no matter who they are. And that in turn kind of makes you more of a passionate librarian and a public service worker, because I don't know any industry that is so hardcore into like the public service aspect of what they do besides working inside of a public library. So if you are wanting to be more involved in that community, helping them with those initial things to make sure that the basic necessities of people's needs, no matter what they are met, I think you'll all thrive in a public library environment for sure.
Thank you. And so that lovely leads into our next question of what are some of the different roles in a public library? I think sometimes people only see maybe what people are doing at a front desk and may not know the range of roles in a public library.
May I start off this one? Yeah. Okay. So sorry, not okay. So, but there are so many roles within a public library. I don't think people realize it until they actually get to a public library. I thought my only job was going to be really shelving materials or providing book recommendations for people. But over time, and I know we have a privilege in my library system because we're fortunate to have a lot of taxpayer support and we're bigger, but we continue to grow and create these positions here for us to support the staffing and the growth of what libraries offer to every community. My role doesn't really exist in many other library systems, but I have noticed that over the last few years, we've had some other Missouri library systems and a few in Illinois that are starting to create more roles in support of the staffing, not just the public. We continue to expand our collection development type of department. So not necessarily selecting materials or acquisitions, but we have more people focused on making sure that our collection continues to be diverse and hits all the areas that we may fail to have resources available for people from across the spectrums. We have ones where they strictly research the types of fishing poles we need for our different organization here to give out to the public. Like, do we get the shorter ones, longer ones? So there is such a variety of jobs you could have within a library. And I just encourage you to not feel like you have to just be a youth librarian or to shelve materials or to help the public, but behind the scenes positions are equally important and vital for the success of those in-person interactions with the public. So many areas you can go just based on the jobs I've had here.
Yeah, I would say Tarza is in a unique situation. Some of the larger library systems really have a ton of specialization. So the bigger your system, the more specialized you can expect your role to be. The smaller the library or the community, the broader you can expect your role to be. So there's an interesting, dynamic in that. The roles that our librarians sort of play here, we are a bit more traditional in that we have the adult librarians, youth librarians, teen librarians. We have technical services, so people who are more involved in processing and, you know, more paraprofessional kind of roles. There's administration. That's another place that I don't think a lot of people are pushed into, you know, like or encouraged toward during library school, but definitely think about it. Administration is such an important piece of what keep libraries operating and, you know, supporting staff and supporting the needs of the public. So that's, I think, another area where a lot of people could get more involved. But we are a bit more of a traditional space in which you'll see more of the based on age groups. And then each of those librarians would focus on or would include a little bit of public service, a little bit of collection development, a little bit of programming. So it sort of is a broader range of activities that you participate in.
And I think perhaps my library is somewhere between the two. I failed to mention we're a medium-sized city of about 156,000 people, but we have 9 libraries. That's what the public wants, is lots of buildings. So that's what we have. And we have a lot of roles that are called reference librarian, but depending on where you're working, that to me, that always connotes working with adults, but that's not really what we mean by it. It should just be called librarian. And then you're helping whoever it is that comes in, particularly at branches. We have a few special roles that are called digital services librarian, emerging technologies librarian, teen services librarian, and the like. We have a lot of branch supervisors, so I definitely echo what Sean is saying about leadership, administrative roles. If you have any interest in that, I certainly, as somebody who hires a lot of people, that's the hardest to find people who are wanting to get into leadership, branch manager, branch supervisor, or other types of supervision, supervisory roles. So if you have any interest in that, you know, seek out a mentor or do some informational interviews or get your feet wet by participating in some type of a committee, or maybe it's your local library association, where you can develop some leadership skills and try it out to see if it's something that you really do want to get into, and then that you can brag about when you are applying for a job. Lots of different possibilities. IT is also obviously something important. Would be nowhere without our IT manager and her coworkers. So
Great.
Thank you.
So leadership skills and maybe some technology. What are 3 to 5 skill sets that you see in qualified candidates if you're in the role to hire?
If I can just hold on to the mic for a moment and answer
Sure.
that one. Some things that I'm looking for. I mentioned leadership skills and abilities, but that includes building relationships and leveraging them, knowing how to do that. Just a general exposure to library work. I think Tarza was saying, you know, it's not just putting things away or making book recommendations. So having some familiarity with what it is, maybe that's you volunteered when you're in high school, or you did an internship while you're in library school, or you've worked in different ways in a library. For me, interest in working and living in a city is super important. Someone who can speak or sign more than one language is certainly a plus. Having some project management experience, whether in a library or in graduate school or in some other employment or volunteer experience, you know, and that could be, as I was saying, with a library association or just a board that you're on. And then community engagement knowledge and experience, you know, knowing what that is and how to succeed with it. And for me, community engagement is working alongside the community to achieve their aspirations or help them meet challenges they have. That's what community engagement is. So that's what I'm looking for.
Great.
I can talk a little. I'm not in a hiring position, like, to be transparent with all of you. So I we're working on recruiting for the library. And one of the things that we look for, or a few of them, are people who are innovative and you're willing to kind of question the process and how things are. And it seems very scary when you are applying for jobs because you don't want to mess that up. You want to make sure you get the job and you're there. You learn it before you start recommending changes. But as long as I've been here and my experience in working with other libraries as well, like things change in advance, just kind of like how human behavior and emotions and what people are going through advance and change so quickly. We have to have staffing that kind of is able to adapt those changes, and most importantly, be comfortable enough to share those ideas. No one will ever, in my experience anyway, look down on you for wanting to do a process or a procedure differently, because we have to kind of check our bias and how we've been doing things, maybe question the status quo and how things have gone over time. And so that innovation aspect, which is also connected to being committed to the industry, all of those are going to be incredibly successful for you. And those are kind of the things that our hiring managers look for, and what I specifically work for when I go to like recruiting events, when we're glancing at resumes and things like that, or seeing how you talk about yourself or what your strengths are in your cover letter. The last thing that we really look for in our organization is people who are understanding of the human experience and the individual, and most importantly, recognizing your own biases when you're interacting with these people or making recommendations about a program or a partnership we should have. Knowing that you may not have personal experience with how that person has lived their life, but being willing to quiet yourself and learn from them and hear from what they have to say, and then change up your procedures and policies that way. So kind of a combination of being innovative, which can be easy if you are committed to the industry or the community that you specifically want to work in. And Jean said that really well earlier, like go live in a city or somewhere that you probably would want to work at, because all of those things will kind of make you a better candidate. So the innovation commitment, and I don't know if you could put this on a resume or not, but being willing to be okay with checking your own bias, because you're going to work with the public. And a lot of the times who you're helping will not look like who you are and will not match your life experience. So that's specifically what we work for in the ways that we interview people when reviewing profiles or resumes and things like that. Be yourself, the short version of that. Yeah.
Yeah. I'd like to add a couple of things. I think that you guys, that's a really great list that Jean and Tarza kind of started. I would say communication is one of the bigger things that we're looking for, your communication skills, because so much of, what you're doing in a librarian role in our, system is all about the people. So you need to be able to communicate with your coworkers. You need to be able to communicate one-on-one in front of a large group. All of that is so important. I would say another thing, and Jean mentioned this, is project management. I think that there's an easy way to go about kind of library work is to sort of look at what other cool libraries are doing and try to copy that, but I'm much more interested in people who can learn, who want to learn things about their community, who want to develop a concept or a service or a procedure, an idea from the ground up and really see it through to implementation. That's a much more valuable kind of employee than someone who recognizes when cool things happen in other places and want to do the same thing. I'm much more interested in how you can formulate your ideas and see them through, make use of the resources that we have to actualize it. So that project management piece is really huge. And I think also kind of strategic decision making. And that's what I like about, what my experience was going to an I school, and what I know a lot of you guys are getting from your iSchool experiences is an understanding of how to interpret data and make decisions about that information that you're presented with. So I think that strategic decision making piece is really huge, and I think that leads into project management. What kind of things are you going to say yes to? What kind of things are you going to say no to? I think that those are all really important skills for people coming into the profession. I noticed there's a question in the chat. Examples of how someone who hasn't started their library career yet might get project management experience. I think that is one place where your university experience is going to be really valuable, because you're doing projects all the time. So whether there's a class where there was some client focused work, that's always good to bring up in your interviews or in your cover letters. Even in a volunteer sort of a role, there are often ways in which you could kind of make it your own and say that, this is something that I recommended, and this is how we came up with a procedure, and this is how we saw it through. Even those kind of smaller experiences about taking an idea and actualizing it and making it a reality, those are going to be really important ways for you to stand out, I think, through an application process.
Thank you. That was a lot of great characteristics. And thank you, Shauna, for catching the chat question. We're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about, now that you know what's involved and know what you should be bringing to the table, I'd like to ask our panelists what the interview process might look like and ways to prepare for that interview process through your resume and interviewing skills. So 2 questions, but they go enough together that I wanted to ask them at the same time.
Okay, I can go again. So our interview setup is probably a little bit different than what you've experienced in other libraries. We let you read the questions in advance. We give you guys 15 minutes and you get to see what we're going to talk about before we sit down in a conversation, and that makes it a way more conversational setup. It's not meant to be a pop quiz for anybody. So it's really important to us that you know what we're going to ask you about, you feel prepared, and the sorts of things that you want to highlight to make sure that you demonstrate this are the things that we're looking for. And I will let you know, this is something that a lot of libraries do, is that as you're giving your questions, a lot of times you'll be rated based on that. So, and it's a way that we help kind of remove some bias from our interview process. We have like a 0 to 5 scale of each of your questions. So even while you're thinking through your questions, you don't want to just answer what's in front of you. Like it's not a multiple choice test. Like, tell us about your public service experience. I have public service experience. Like you want to tell a story so that you get to that 5. You want to really make sure that you are figuring out what they're looking for from that question, and then tell that story to demonstrate it. And the more you demonstrate it, the higher you're going to raise yourself on that pile of applicants. So that's really important to recognize. So when you're thinking of these questions or you're preparing for your interviews, there's a lot of great lists out there. Whenever I'm helping someone who is, job searching or anything, I show them there's a list on themuse.com that is like 50 questions that every employer has. Just plan that out in advance. Have those answers ready, because you're going to see 2 or 3 of them in every single interview that you go into. Tell us about yourself, all of those like very, easy questions, but it'll help you kind of figure out how to say it in a way that helps you rise to the top. So yeah, those are some ways in which our process is different, which is the same. Yeah, I'm sure you guys have a lot more to add.
Tarza, okay if I go next?
Oh, yes, please go ahead.
Okay. So I'll just back it up a little bit, because this may or may not be familiar to you, to everybody here. So we have, in our case, the city of Springfield has a human resources department, and they're the ones that through the software collect all the applications. And then once the date has closed, they will refer them over to us. There often are some screening questions that if someone answers no, like they would not relocate to our city, then we won't even see their application. So, be thoughtful about how you answer those types of questions that might be screening you out. And then I look at all the applications, and then people who are promising, who either are meeting what it says we need in the job description, or are close, or seem promising even though they don't meet things. I talk to those folks on the phone so that they can learn more about us and ask me questions, and then I can know more about them. and then take those results back to the hiring team. And the folks who seem to be the most promising will do full interviews. At this time, we're still doing Zoom interviews. And I don't know when we'll go back to in-person. Since a lot of times people are relocating here, it seems to be a kindness, since I can't cover travel costs, to do things online. But if you're a candidate, you may or may want to travel anyway. I know that's not a small consideration. I get that. But just if it's a place you're truly interested in relocating to, it's to your benefit, can be to our benefit as well. Occasionally we do a second interview, and the people in the interview panel are usually me, the manager of the department, the supervisor of the department, and sometimes someone from the human resources department, possibly the chief diversity and inclusion officer. I have thought about doing what Shauna's library does, which is giving out the questions ahead of time. And sometimes we've done that for the second interviews. We're not all the way there yet, but there's typically a presentation requested as part of the interview, and that will obviously, or maybe not obviously, be something that you would have ahead of time. I try to give people, over the weekend or, a few days to get their presentation together. And then when we are in person, we'll include a tour of the location. So you should always remember that tour is part of your interview as well.
I like what both of you said. The questions, having them see it ahead of time, because I profusely sweat and get very anxious at every interview. So that would probably save me a lot of discomfort for however long it goes. Our process is kind of a little bit similar to what Jean's process is, and then we have more specialized interview processes based on the roles you want to get into or the departments you want to get into. For example, our lab trainer role, which was my first job in the library, requires, this is true across the board, you're always going to have an initial phone interview, kind of to go over all of the applicants that have applied. The managers can usually pick from like the pool of applicants whenever they see their applications come in through our specific software that we use, which is Dayforce. And that usually lasts anywhere between 10 to 15 minutes. It can be over the phone or through Zoom, kind of like whatever is preferred for the candidate and whatever works best for the managers. And if you go on to the next process, you then have typically it's a face-to-face interview. Unless you live somewhere else, then we are okay with doing a Zoom interview. You would just have to tell us. So everyone across the board has to go through those two processes. And then there could be like a third interview step if you're going more into a specialized role. So if you're a youth librarian or a youth services specialist, your second interview may be a combination of the second and a third one, which is having that face-to-face and then bringing a plan or an activity that you are willing to do as that type of librarian or specialist. We do the same for people who go into like the adult services coordinator or those types of departments. I don't really think we do a third step like that for reference librarians. And then like for lab trainer, staff trainer, anything that requires some type of instruction with the public, typically that third interview is you coming and teaching or doing a sample class for. It becomes a bit intense, I'll be honest, because that's a lot of steps, but it allows you to really get to know the person and the candidate. I'm not great at first interview, so the second or that third interview usually is where I can kind of make my point, but like initial reactions from people usually is just mixed, but that's just who I am. I've learned that about myself like over time. So I appreciate when there's kind of those additional steps to the process, because it could be hard to really try and stand out from that 10 or 15 minute initial interview, because you want to give them, the answers they want to hear, but also show a little bit of yourself. So that's how our process works. We also have like if it's a one person, one management department, which we don't have at all besides one, other managers get to sit in on that interview process to help them kind of look for things, or in a way like check that bias, or, you know, if you're willing to lean towards this candidate for a specific reason, or because they look like you, or you have a similar background. So we always have another manager or administrator involved in that. And then for administration, which you should all go into, listen to what they both said. Administration is really cool. That usually involves other people in administration. So we've had our director and CEO sitting on some of those positions, our deputy director, and other administrators, and even hiring managers involved in that process, just to kind of help the situation, read the candidate, and then it allows the candidate to ask questions to various people in the room and see just kind of how hands-on it is with that hiring process. Yeah, so our process kind of can take longer because of all of those steps, but the candidates so far seem to like it. So I also have, I do our new hire orientation for all of our library employees and have for a year. So I always ask them, like, how did you feel about it? Did you feel like it was long? And people say it can be a little bit long, but they liked having those different steps because it allowed them to show the different parts of themselves that they may not have had the chance to do on that first interaction or that first meeting.
That's great. It's wonderful to see the variety. And I think part of the reason for this panel is to kind of demystify some of the things in librarianship roles that you wouldn't necessarily know or even know to ask about. So I appreciate our panelists sharing. We did see some questions in the chat. One was about what kind of things someone might be asked to present. I think we answered that in terms of lessons or coming with a plan of a project or something like that. But if you didn't feel that covered it, please elaborate more. But we did have another question in the chat about if someone is just starting out and they feel like they experiences are more general and they don't necessarily have any direct experience in what they're applying for. Do you have any cover letter advice to how to get the message across that they are a good candidate for the position?
Can I answer Apollo's question first about
Sure.
some examples of what kind of things someone might
Yes.
ask? For us, that depends on the role. So when I did lab trainer, I was told kind of very specific guidelines, but still a little bit vague. So I can like try and it's kind of a way to see how someone would interpret a piece of information. So I brought in a plan on how to, I knew that the older patrons were typically the average group of people who went to these computer classes. So I did a 10-minute presentation on how to create a Facebook account. And 8 minutes of that was about what Facebook is, what social media is. So that's what I was like bringing to the table. And over time, I've also said in other ones when it came to those more of those tech-based jobs. So it's a lot of like, how can you take something that's a bit complex, not for you complex, but for general patrons who come into the library who may need help with faxing or printing or saying something like, I need to copy this, and you show them a copier, but what they meant is take their form, make it digital, email it to themselves and figure out how to upload it for their insurance or anything like that. So I've seen people come in just like explaining what we have a simple scan, which faxes and scans things, makes them digital all at the same time. So we've had people come in presenting on that because that's what they wanted to do for like the tech job, kind of seeing if you can take something that's a bit complex and breaking it down into small steps in a way that someone can independently do it themselves, not always relying on the help of a library worker to do it. We have people like the youth librarians or youth services who bring in their favorite books or children's books, and they'll just demo what it would be like a story time or how they would do that activity. We've had people do like a little bit of a science experiment, and they just wanted to be like a regular library associate at our branches, which will be patron interaction. And even though doing a science experiment for children is not necessarily a part of their job, but if the youth services or librarians needed support or help, we offer that type of environment where that person can do a program like that, even though it's not a part of their job. if that's what they're interested in. So it kind of varies based on the role you want to get into and how you would want to, what you would want to bring as like your presentation.
Thank you.
And Michelle was talking about asking if the hiring process is different for early career roles versus later. And for me, yes, it is. I mean, almost always for the entry level jobs as children's librarian, a question is about share with us about a program that you would like to present for the audience at the location you'd be working at. And so I think it's successful if people can present a program in an engaging way, if they have thought about, okay, that I'm going to do, whatever, how to make an aquarium for turtles, let's say, okay, how did they get to that? What did they think about that would make them think that's going to be an attractive program for people to come to? Did they think about all the elements, like how are we going to promote this, and what might my budget be? What help might I need to promote it? What space would work best for this? What do I need to think about around it? So not just, the program itself. Even if I think that program would never work at that branch, it's okay as long as they've really they can show the thought that went into it. Because they don't necessarily live there and they don't necessarily know. They're not working there yet. Also, for children's, asking people to share a story that they think would succeed in a story time is very telling for us. I've had people share books that are really just not going to work in a story time. And so it makes me wonder. I had somebody bring their own book that they had self-published and share that. And that just was not a good note. For a digital services librarian that's more advanced, I won't give you all the details about the presentation, but it was about in what ways can your staff colleagues be involved in updating and enlivening our website, creating content for it? How will you guide them, teach them? How will you lead this type of work productively, cooperatively? Even if they don't directly report to you. So it's about like the work, but it's also about organizing that project. And it's also about interacting with others. So that is for a more advanced type of position. Since I have the mic, if I could say something about cover letters, because I see that coming up in the chat. You can send me your resume or not send me your resume, because you have to fill out the online application, which is basically a resume. Cover letter is always super helpful to help you stand out from others. And I would recommend the same thing I do for resumes is have some kind of like a generic template database where you're keeping everything there. And then when little stories come up that show how you reacted to something, even if it's not a patron story. I know that someone was concerned about not having a patron story to talk about. Maybe it's something else that shows how, I can't wait to get into the field, but, through library school, I realized I wasn't having much opportunity to take a leadership role or to figure out budgeting or something. So I got involved with my local Head Start, and I got to visit classrooms, and it was really great to be able to go to the migrant program and do story times there. And then on the board, we also had to examine budgets, and I led blah, blah, blah initiative. So, just think broadly about what types of experience you might talk about in your cover letter. And I won't throw you out if you say, I'm really looking forward to working at, Tut Hill Public Library, and you've applied to Springfield City Library, but, try to get those little details correct.
Yes, they make a difference.
I understand that it's really hard to apply to a lot of jobs. I'm sorry, Shauna, but I get it. So I'm not throwing you out because of that. And I know it's a lot to ask for a cover letter when you're applying to a lot of places, but it's helpful to try to get that done, right? Sorry, Shauna.
Oh, no, it's okay. I will say we might throw you out if you don't put our library. If you are applying to a different position and it's like obvious, like you're not, it might be this isn't going to work kind of a situation. So it is very, very important. There have been a couple of questions about like the idea of a story that I mentioned in the chat. And I don't think it's necessarily about like telling a story, and you do that a lot in your interviews, but in your cover letter, tell me the story of you. So if I look at your resume and you don't have a clear cover letter, I'm going to tell my own story. I'm going to say, oh, they had 3 jobs in 1 year. I wonder how reliable they're going to be, or, things like that. So you have to tell me that story so that I don't make assumptions on my own. So you have to talk about, if you had 3 jobs in 1 year, what an amazing experience you had with these 3 different grant funded positions, and you were able to accomplish these things in such a short amount of time. And, that's what I mean by telling a story, is that you don't necessarily have to have individual like standout patron stories to discuss, but you need to be able to talk through your experience and why you fit this particular role, for us to be able to see past what is in your resume, not to see past, but like really see you in a resume. If that makes sense.
Shauna, that's such a great example, because that is so true with human nature, that if the story's not there, people reading it will fill in the gaps. That's just how it'll go. So to be proactive in telling your own story is very important. And just a nod that the students who are part of our guests today are from one of the participating schools that we're working with. And I have met many of the professionals that their job is to help people with resume and cover letters. So do not feel like, you have to have it figured out all in this one session. But this is showing us that it's important to put in the work to create those cover letters that tell your story, because they are going to be read, especially in the library world. Did I cut you off though, Tarza? I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, listen to Shauna and Jean and Lori, because this is an industry of people who know honestly how to read between the lines and to kind of have a little bit of understanding about who you might be just based on the word choices you might use. So just be yourself as best as you can in the cover letter, and make sure that grammar is there. Make sure you have correct punctuations. Make sure that if you have 2 spaces after a period, make sure that is consistent throughout. Like, those are all of the things that might be the deciding factor between you and another candidate. And just customize each one. There's a lot of AI tools and technology out there that can help you quickly put a cover letter together or a resume and things like that. And this is an industry where hiring managers kind of know when something is genuine or written by you to tell your story, or honestly by an AI tool or something like that. So kind of put yourself in the position of a hiring manager. Like, what cover letter do you want to see? As you're reading it, are you going to say like, oh, this is kind of like lame, or this makes me sound like I'm just trying to give them the information that they might want? So you're making guesses. So it's just from the beginning, it's better to be yourself, and share parts of yourself in that cover letter and why you want that role or to work for them, especially if you don't have any experience working in that type of a library or in that role. Because here we have so many times where it's come down to 2 people, and then it comes down to like their resume, or in their cover letter, where they're like, do they pay attention to detail if they didn't format things consistently throughout, which can be a little bit of an indicator on the project management, or even like some of the strategic ideas that both Shauna and Jean also talked about. So paying attention to those things, even though you might be rushing or you think it's minor, those are the things that will help you stand out compared to like someone else. Yeah, it's an industry of people who kind of read and pay attention to that stuff for a living. So it's really important to pay attention to it.
Very good advice from everyone. While we're waiting to see if there's any final questions, I wanted to make sure that I shared the screen with the panelist names. I think I jumped over that technology-wise at the beginning, and this is being recorded, so I didn't want to miss that slide. So I'm going to leave that up for a few minutes so we capture it in the recording. But and I also want to take, while we have a minute, to see if anyone else is putting something in chat. I wanted to thank our panelists. This was completely volunteer on their part. We so appreciate experts in the field joining us to help our future generation of public librarians. And it was really great, just even in the conversation to get ready for the panel, meeting people. I think that librarians overall have this desire to help people, and it just is so nice in these situations where we can have these questions answered by people who are living it every day. So thank you very much for taking the time to be part of the panel today. Oh, and I see that some people have dropped into the chat if you have any contact information. So thank you, Jean, for doing that. We will capture the chat for the recording. So we appreciate that. Any final questions before we sign off for today? All right. Oh, I see a question. What does the path from entry-level youth services librarian, for example, to administration look like? Are there any steps you recommend taking while we're still in school if we're interested in working in administration? What steps should we take once we're in our first role? So any comments for that?
I'd love to answer that because I sort of went into administration earlier in my career. I'm in the first decade of my career. So I started out as a teen librarian and sort of noticed kind of early on that I really liked the management piece of it. When you go into management, you do well in your job, but you also enjoy supporting other people and being successful in their job. And that's what kind of changes when you go into a management or a administration role. Yeah, I found myself in a supervisory kind of role and then moved into administration from that. But I would say, depending on where you're looking at moving to or living after your graduate program, you could be in a community where you can there are some communities in Michigan where you can get a director job straight out of library school. They're smaller, jobs. They're not going to be as much as you would get paid for a director position in larger communities. But if administration is something you're very interested in, you can go for it. And I would, encourage people who have that kind of a mindset to just start early in their career looking at management style positions, things like that. Yeah, especially if you have had supervisory experience, maybe in the past, maybe you worked at Panera for like 10 years and ended up being a manager there. Like that is really going to help you in future administration kind of roles.
Great, thank you very much. So I want to thank everyone who joined us today, and this recording will be saved where the participating schools can get to it. And so we'll try to send out directly to anyone who registered for this, but if you have any questions or follow-up, please feel free to do so. We're so glad that you came today. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. This was great. Wonderful to connect with you.